My name is John Thompson, and until recently, I believed I lived an ordinary, if comfortable, life. I worked hard as a regional sales manager, had a modest home in a quiet suburb outside of Atlanta, and shared a decade-long marriage with Rebecca. We built a life together, with plans for our future and a small daughter who brightened our days. I prided myself on being a devoted husband, a reliable provider, and a man who trusted his partner with every secret. But sometimes, trust is fragile, and one discovery can shatter it all. It began on an otherwise typical Monday morning. I was having my cup of black coffee in the kitchen, scrolling through the news on my phone, when I noticed something odd. As part of our everyday routine, Rebecca and I shared our phone's contact list for emergencies, and I'd often glance at hers out of habit. Today, a name caught my eye, a name I didn't recognize, Savannah. I paused, heart skipping a beat. Savannah wasn't among the people we knew, nor had I ever heard Rebecca mention her. I dismissed it at first as a possible mix-up or perhaps a mislabeling, but then I recalled a string of missed calls from an unknown number on her voicemail over the past few days. I asked Rebecca casually at breakfast, "Hey, I noticed a contact on your phone, Savannah. Do you know her?" She hesitated for a moment before offering a quick smile and saying, "Oh, that's just someone from work." The way she said it, though, didn't match the easy familiarity I expected. Her smile was tight, and her eyes didn't quite meet mine. I tried not to read too much into it, but an unsettling feeling began to gnaw at me throughout the day at work. I found my mind wandering back to that name. I recalled the tone of her voice on the phone last night, when she brushed off my casual questions about colleagues and work-related contacts. Every unanswered call and every vague reply piled up in my head, forming a picture that was slowly coming into focus. Something was off. By the time I left the office, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. Home that evening, after our daughter was asleep, I sat in the dim light of our living room. I unlocked Rebecca's phone when she was in the bathroom, always a dangerous habit, but one I justified as harmless in a marriage built on mutual trust. I scrolled through her recent call logs and text messages. There, between routine work updates and friendly banter, was a series of phone calls from an unknown number. The timestamps coincided with late afternoons when she'd said she was working late or running errands. My heart pounded as I tapped on the call history and read through a few voicemail transcripts. In one message, a soft female voice said, "I can't wait to see you, Savannah," followed by Rebecca's hurried reply, "Not tonight. Sorry, I have plans." The tone was familiar, intimate. I felt as though the room was closing in around me. The realization that the phone calls had revealed more than Rebecca had let on was overwhelming. My mind raced. Who was the Savannah? Was she just a co-worker, or was there something more? I felt betrayed without a concrete confrontation. The silence in the house screamed with every unanswered question. I sat there, heart heavy and mind spinning, knowing that nothing would ever be the same after this night that night. I tossed and turned. I replayed every conversation, every half-smile, every subtle shift in Rebecca's tone. The evidence on her phone was undeniable, yet a part of me clung to hope that it was all a misunderstanding. But the growing dread in my gut told me otherwise. I vowed silently that if the truth was hidden behind vague work excuses and carefully deleted messages, I would uncover it. I wouldn't let betrayal fester without a fight. By the time dawn crept through the curtains, I had made up my mind. I would get to the bottom of this. I wasn't going to let her deceit destroy everything I had built, my pride, my dignity, and our once solid marriage. As I prepared for the day ahead, I resolved that every call, every contact, every hidden text would be scrutinized. I would uncover the identity of Savannah and learn the truth behind those phone calls. No matter how painful the revelation, the following day was a blur of forced normalcy and simmering anger. At breakfast, Rebecca seemed distracted, her eyes flitting away whenever I tried to catch her gaze. I couldn't let on that I already knew more than I should. I had to play the part of the trusting husband until I could gather more evidence. I spent the morning at work with a mind divided between my responsibilities and the dark thoughts at home. During lunch, I began a quiet investigation of my own. I accessed a backup of her phone data using a little software I had from my IT days. It wasn't long before I found a pattern. Over the last month, whenever she claimed to be busy or away on work, there were calls, regular, intimate-sounding calls from the unknown number. They were too frequent to be mere coincidences. I extracted the call logs and saved every detail, every timestamp, and every voicemail transcript. The more I looked, the more I was convinced that these communications were not work-related, but rather part of a secret rendezvous, and my anger grew with each new discovery. I recalled a particular evening when Rebecca had come home later than usual. I had asked her about her delay, and she had muttered something about a last-minute meeting. Now, the evidence suggested that meeting wasn't with a business partner. It was with someone else entirely. I felt a burning mix of humiliation and rage. The idea that the woman I loved had hidden this secret life from me, that she had made time for someone named Savannah, filled me with a bitter resolve. After work, I returned home early again. I needed to confront the situation before it spiraled further out of control in my mind. That evening, when our daughter was tucked in bed and the house was silent except for the ticking clock, I approached Rebecca. I kept my tone measured as I said, "Rebecca, I've noticed some things lately on your phone. Who is Savannah?" The question was simple, yet loaded with years of trust that now felt shattered. That Rebecca's face went pale. For a long, heavy moment, she said nothing. Finally, her voice came out in a strained whisper. "She's someone I met at work." I didn't think it was a big deal. Her eyes darted away, and I could see the fear behind them. "Not a big deal," I repeated, my tone hardening. "Then why do you get phone calls with messages like, 'I can't wait to see you, Savannah'? And why do you hide these calls?" She tried to brush it off with weak excuses. "It's just a friend, John. Nothing more." But I wasn't buying it. I could feel my blood boiling as the conversation grew more heated. I demanded, "I want you to tell me the truth, Rebecca. Who is she?" Tears welled up in her eyes as she stammered, I can't. Please, just let it go." But I wasn't finished. I told her that I had seen the call logs, that I knew there was more to this than a harmless friendship. The confrontation escalated quickly. Her pleas were drowned out by the sound of my own pounding heart and rising anger. I wasn't willing to accept vague denials any longer. My mind was already racing with dark plans of retribution for the betrayal I felt burning inside me. I warned her in a low, dangerous tone that if the truth wasn't laid out, I would find it myself, and that there would be consequences. After that heated exchange, Rebecca retreated to the bedroom, and I was left alone with a torrent of emotions. I spent the night pacing the floor, replaying her every word, every hesitation. The evidence was overwhelming, and the fact that she would lie to my face was an insult I could not bear. I knew I had to dig deeper. I vowed to follow every lead until I discovered the true identity of the Savannah and the extent of the betrayal. The next morning, I made preparations to take my investigation off the phone and into the real world. I began by tracking the incoming call history to pinpoint times and locations where the calls occurred. I needed to know where she was meeting this mysterious woman. I also reached out to a couple of trusted acquaintances with some tech know-how, asking discreetly if they could help me recover any deleted messages from her phone. Every scrap of digital evidence was to be preserved as ammunition in what was quickly becoming a personal war. By the end of the day, I had a plan. I would follow the digital breadcrumbs, piece together her schedule, and, if necessary, confront Savannah in person. The thought of it sent a shiver of anticipation mixed with revulsion through me. I was no longer the man who'd passively accepted his life. I was becoming someone driven by vengeance. The phone calls had revealed everything, and I was determined to rip apart the facade of lies she'd so carefully constructed. Over the following week, I plunged headfirst into an investigation that consumed every spare moment. My days were spent analyzing phone logs, mapping call times to specific locations, and scouring social media for any mention of Savannah. My nights were restless, haunted by images of her face and the whispered promises captured in those voicemails. The more I uncovered, the darker the truth became. I discovered that on several occasions when Rebecca's geolocation was suddenly off on our shared safety app, she had been at a specific upscale coffee shop in a neighboring town. I drove there one late afternoon, parking discreetly across the street. Inside, patrons chatted quietly over steaming cups of coffee. I scanned the room, hoping to catch a glimpse of a familiar face, but saw only strangers. Then, in a corner booth, I noticed a young woman whose style was markedly different from the typical clientele, a confident, almost defiant look in her eyes, and a smartphone in hand that she kept glancing at frequently. I recognized the name from a saved contact on Rebecca's phone. Savannah. My heart pounded as I watched her. She wasn't alone. A man was with her, laughing and leaning close as if sharing an inside joke. My mind raced. Was this the truth behind my wife's betrayal? Was the girl from the contact list more than just a co-worker? I snapped a few discreet photos with my phone, my hands trembling with a mixture of anger and sorrow. I needed evidence. I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with over the next few days. I tracked her movements with a determination that bordered on obsession. I followed the pattern of calls, the times when Rebecca would disappear, and the places where Savannah was repeatedly spotted. Each discovery stoked the fire of betrayal within me. I even managed to hack into a secondary phone account, something I never imagined doing, just to recover a few deleted messages. The text confirmed my worst fears. Rebecca had been meeting this Savannah repeatedly, and their conversations were intimate, filled with details that no mere friendship should ever share with evidence in hand. I felt my resolve harden into something almost inhuman. I wasn't content with mere discovery. I needed retribution. I began to train myself physically, hitting the gym with a vengeance and taking up late-night boxing sessions. Every punch I threw in the ring was a release of the pent-up anger that had built over the past weeks. I wasn't going to let her betray me and then hide behind lies and excuses. I would confront them, and I would make sure they paid the price. I reached out to a friend from my past, a man named Marcus, who had seen his own share of hard lessons and who now ran a small, no-nonsense gym on the outskirts of town. Marcus agreed to help me channel my rage into something tangible. Under his stern guidance, I learned to control my anger, to focus it, and to transform it into a weapon. Every training session, every bout of rigorous physical activity, steeled me for what was to come, a confrontation that would force Rebecca to face the consequences of her betrayal, and that would leave Savannah and the man she kept company broken late one night. As I sat in my study reviewing the photos I had taken at the coffee shop and the saved text messages, I made a grim decision. I would follow the next call pattern to its end. The digital breadcrumbs pointed to an upscale bar downtown, a place where I suspected Savannah and her mysterious lover would meet again. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of my determination. There was no turning back now. The truth had been revealed by phone calls and hidden messages, and I was prepared to meet that truth with unrelenting force. The night of reckoning arrived on a chilly Saturday. I had parked my car several blocks away from the Midnight Lounge, an upscale bar known for its discreet clientele and dimly lit corners. My pulse was steady, each beat fueled by a mix of adrenaline and cold fury. I remembered every piece of evidence. The call logs, the texts, the photos. Tonight, I would finally confront the woman who had stolen a piece of my life, the mysterious Savannah, and force her to answer for her part in this betrayal. I entered the bar quietly, blending in with the subdued crowd. The soft jazz playing in the background and the low hum of conversation did little to calm the storm raging inside me. I made my way to a secluded corner where I could observe without drawing attention. It wasn't long before I saw her, Savannah, standing at the bar. She was stunning, with an air of confidence that made her stand out. Dressed in a chic outfit and with her hair pulled back elegantly, she exuded an allure that was hard to ignore. Across from her, A man I'd never seen before leaned in close as they spoke in hushed tones. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, my eyes fixed on them. "Savannah," I called out, my voice low and measured. The conversation halted abruptly. The man glanced nervously at her, and she turned slowly to face me. In that moment, I saw a flash of recognition, or was it fear, in her eyes. "Do I know you?" she asked coolly, though her voice trembled slightly. "Not yet," I replied, stepping closer. "But I know everything. The calls, the messages, they all point to you. Who are you, and what do you have with my wife?" The words spilled out with a controlled fury that startled even me. That a hush fell over the immediate area as eyes turned in our direction. Savannah's expression shifted from feigned indifference to something like panic. The man beside her moved to block her, but I wasn't about to back down. "I'm not here to be polite," I continued, my tone icy. "I want answers." Before she could reply, the tension escalated. The man tried to usher her away, but I grabbed her arm roughly. "Don't move," I hissed. "I want to hear everything." Her eyes filled with tears as she mumbled something about it being complicated and that Rebecca, my wife, had asked her to keep quiet. I felt a surge of rage at that name. "Your mistress?" I spat. "You're not just some random girl on her contact list, are you? You're part of her lies." Savannah tried to pull away, but I held her tight, my grip unyielding. In that charged moment, a brawl erupted. The man beside her lunged forward, attempting to shield her, and chaos broke out in the dim light of the lounge. I fought with the ferocity of a man betrayed. Every punch I threw was fueled by months of suppressed anger and humiliation. Chairs overturned, shouts echoed, and for a few brutal minutes, the upscale bar turned into a battleground. Amid the melee, I managed to shove the man aside and focus solely on Savannah. My actions weren't driven by a desire to kill, yet, but by the need to make her feel every ounce of the betrayal I'd endured. Finally, with the crowd scattering and security struggling to restore order, I dragged Savannah into a deserted alley outside the bar. Under the harsh glare of a flickering street lamp, I pinned her against the cold brick wall. "Tell me everything," I growled. "How long has this been going on? What does my wife have with you?" Her eyes, wide with terror and regret, met mine. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she sobbed. I never meant to hurt you." But her words were lost in the storm of my fury. I struck out, a series of brutal blows that left her gasping and disoriented. I wasn't done. I needed her confession, and I needed her to understand that betrayal comes with a price. As the beating continued, I could feel the darkness inside me solidify into something irreversible. I knew that tonight was only one step in a long journey, a journey that would see every liar, every cheater, paying the price for their deceit. I left Savannah in that dark alley, battered and broken, a grim promise of what was yet to come. My heart pounded with a mix of satisfaction and dread. I had crossed a line, and I knew there was no turning back. In the days that followed, the weight of my actions settled heavily on me. The confrontation at the Midnight Lounge had sent shockwaves through our small circle. Rebecca's phone records, the incriminating call logs, and now the violent episode with Savannah had all been laid bare. I had uncovered the truth behind the mystery contact, and it was more painful than I ever could have imagined. Home, the atmosphere was suffocating. Rebecca's once bright eyes were dull, filled with guilt and regret. She rarely spoke, and when she did, her words were laced with fear. Every corner of our home reminded me of what had been lost: trust, love, and the illusion of a perfect marriage. I tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy for the sake of our daughter, but the air was thick with tension. Every look from Rebecca felt like a silent admission of betrayal. I knew that my quest for vengeance was far from over. The violence of that night had been only the beginning, a prelude to a series of retributions that I intended to carry out until every responsible party paid dearly. I began to prepare for the inevitable confrontations with Rebecca and anyone else involved in this web of deceit. I spent long hours training, my fists now more accustomed to the brutal language of retribution than the gentle touch of a loving partner. Marcus, my old friend, reminded me that vengeance was a double-edged sword, one that could easily consume its wielder. But I was past caring about such warnings. My pride, my honor, had been trampled, and I would ensure that the cost of betrayal was measured in blood late one night, as I sat. In the quiet darkness of our living room, I reviewed every piece of evidence I had gathered. The call logs, the texts, the photos from the coffee shop, and the bruised, broken form of Savannah in the alley. All of it was a testament to the collapse of our once sacred bond. I realized that the truth was more devastating than any lie I could have imagined. Rebecca had not only betrayed me, she had willingly plunged our lives into a dangerous underworld where deceit was currency and trust was a forgotten word. In a final act of retribution, I confronted Rebecca one last time. In the cold light of dawn, with our daughter quietly playing in the background, I demanded that she explain everything. No more lies, no more half-truths. The confrontation was raw and brutal. Words were exchanged, voices raised, and ultimately, a physical struggle ensued. I wasn't looking for her death, just an answer and a punishment that she would carry every day. In the ensuing fight, I made sure that every blow I delivered was a message. Betrayal would never go unpunished. When it was over, Rebecca lay trembling on the floor, tears streaming down her face. I stood over her, chest heaving, my heart numb yet ablaze with the satisfaction of having reclaimed my dignity. But even as I delivered my final ultimatum, promising that if she ever tried to deceive me again, I would not hesitate, I felt a profound emptiness. The man I once was had been lost in the pursuit of revenge, replaced by a creature defined solely by anger and violence. In the weeks that followed, as I tried to piece together the remnants of my shattered life, I realized that the path of vengeance was a lonely one. I had taken the first steps on a road that might eventually lead to my own ruin, but there was no turning back. The phone calls had revealed everything. The lies, the infidelity, the dark underbelly of a life I thought I knew. And as I drove away from our home for the final time, leaving behind a legacy of pain and betrayal, I couldn't help but wonder if reclaiming my honor was worth the cost. The American dream I once believed in was now nothing more than a faded memory, replaced by a harsh reality where trust was broken and vengeance ruled. I merged onto the highway, the rising sun casting long shadows over the road ahead. I was an avenger now, a man scarred by betrayal, forever haunted by the sound of phone calls that revealed more than words ever could. And with every mile I traveled, I knew that the ghosts of my past would never let me rest, for in this world, the price of infidelity is paid in blood. End of story.